Greetings, gamers! Welcome to a very special treat. A Fire Emblem tier list of one of my absolute favorite games, Genealogy FE4 Gen 1. Now, particularly, I'm only going to go over Gen 1 because I do believe that going over individual generations is very a very good idea, right? It's just a good idea to go over each and every individual part of a very different game, right? Gen 1 and Gen 2 are very different games. Of course, it's still Genealogy, so you're still playing Genealogy whether you're playing Gen 1 or 2, but they're completely different. And it also depends on how you make your units. Now, for me, in my Gen 2 units are typically different than some people's choices, and the reason why that is because I do like to do some of the more fun builds, less efficient builds, but more fun builds. And so when I go over the Gen 2 units, I'm going to be specifically talking about the individual children that I have created. I'm not going to be doing a substitute tier list, and the only reason why is because if I'm being honest with you, I've never played a genealogy substitute run. And the reason why is because I like inheritance too much to give it up. That might almost sound a little bit silly, like Gamerman. Why not have that little bit of challenge? Because technically, Gen 2 all substitutes is probably one of the hardest ways to play the game, and there's probably people out there who prefer it that way. I just enjoy playing Genealogy in the sense that you're making the pairings, you're doing things efficiently in Gen 1, you're doing things efficiently in Gen 2, you're inheriting the good weapons, the good gold, so on and so forth, the good items. And that makes the game more fun for me, in my humble opinion. Granted, I've never played a substitute run, so I don't know for an absolute fact if the game is actually made more fun than a substitute run just because I'm doing the inheritance. But I played the game many times. By this point, if I enjoy it, I enjoy it, right? So either way, today's tier list is all about Gen 1. Gen Fun, as many people would call it. Okay, so without further ado, it is time to rate these units. First and foremost, always begin with Sigurd, the main lord of the game, the main lord of Gen 1, the main protagonist of Genealogy, and really, he is the catalyst of everything that happens in this game. Both the good and the bad. He is the catalyst. He is who is found to be in the right place at the right time. A lot of people complain about Sigurd because Sigurd isn't really a interesting character himself. He's not very interesting. I disagree. I think he's a very interesting character because the thing is that a lot of people don't like or believe that characters shouldn't have foils, right? Or whatever. Sigurd does have foils. He has quite a few of them. They're not major. They're not like game breaking. They're not like what would be classified as morally gray today. Something that doesn't exist, right? You're either black or white in the moral sphere. You're either evil or good. There is no gray. So that's perfect because Sigurd is on the light side. He is a good man. He is a crusader, a fighter of justice who fights against the wicked and so on and so forth. What makes him interesting is what happens just constantly through the devious plannings of things like characters like Manfroy and his cult, and how that Sigurd is just in the middle of it with Reptor and Langbolt and Arvis and so on and so forth. The schemes, they're just fantastic. I love the story of Genealogy. Now, I'm not going over the story today. I'm not even going to take that into account with particular characters, but I will say that it is interesting to note that so many people despise Sigurd's character because he's so-called one-note. I actually think he's quite interesting. Of course, he's not the most interesting lord. Lords like Leaf exist. Of course, he's not the most interesting lord, but at least he's more interesting than somebody like Ike, who is literally a non-character. He's basically a self-insert before that was ever a serious thing. It's kind of gross. Sigurd goes into S tier. Absolutely amazing. So the tiers are ranked a little bit differently and given a little bit differently than when I did my Thracia tier list. S for amazing, A for great, B for good, C for average, D for poor. It's basically the same kind of concept. I just didn't want to put the same wording. I didn't really want to use the same color scheme exactly. So I flipped the color scheme and I used a little bit different wording, but you can kind of think about it the same way. The only problem with that is that most characters in this game who belong in S tier, like Sigurd doesn't really have utility. He doesn't. He, you could say his seizing is utility. That's fine. I think that's perfectly fine. In fact, I would call that his utility, just like I called seizing and other chapter objectives for Leaf his utility. But besides that, there's really nothing. You don't have rescue in this game. There is no rescue. So even if Sigurd is mounted, there is no utility there. He can't really use magical weapons. He can't use staves. He can only use swords. Now, swords are the best weapons in the game. Of course, he's not really good at using stuff like the magic swords. He can use lances. You're never going to use a lance on him except for maybe like a javelin here and there, right? So taking that into account, particularly, you have to look at Sigurd and be like, well, does he belong in A tier? Because S tier in my mind is perfect combat and utility, and that's why I changed that. So for this particular tier list, S tier is just an amazing unit, because Sigurd is the best Lord in the series. The best. There is nobody better. He starts off the best, he gets the best stuff, everything gets handed to him. He is very good at combat, incredibly good, even at base. There are so many tools that you receive, like the Brave Sword, the Silver Sword, so on and so forth, that make him a better unit. And as you move forward through the game, you realize that nobody else in your entire squad, regardless of skills, regardless of weapons, regardless of holy blood, regardless of growths, is better than Sigurd. So not only is he your best Lord in the series, he's the best Lord in Genealogy because of his start. He's also one of the best units in the game, all in all. There is almost nothing you can do without Sigurd, right? Because you need him to progress the story, you need him to progress the game, you need him to fight the enemies, you need him to help with the efficiency. There's a lot of people who will play this game kind of super inefficiently and will use a D or a C tier unit, and only a D or a C tier unit, or a few of them, and basically give himself a bit of a handicap in that matter. But the fact of the matter is even if you decide to do that, you still have to use Sigurd. No matter what, you always have to use Sigurd. And the fact of the matter is that he belongs in S tier. He is an incredible, amazing unit. I just love him for that. His growths are pretty good. I wouldn't say they're astonishing, but they are pretty good. And they do everything he needs. Now, he doesn't have a promotion, which is kind of sad, because his base stats are definitely not where they would be if he did receive a promotion after the fact. So, but he is pre-promoted. That's one of the cool things about Genealogy, is that a pre-promoted unit is just promoted early out of the total 30 levels. You promote at 20. Sigurd is promoted at 4. So he doesn't have to worry about a promotion. He just levels to 30. Every other character has to level to 20, then promote, then level the rest of the way up to 30. That's interesting how they did it in this game. It reminds me of the way that Marth works in FE11. Not exactly, but obviously because he doesn't have a promotion. He sort of works like the pre-promotes in Genealogy, and I wonder if there was some kind of tie there. So, without further ado, it is time to move forward. Sigurd is great and wonderful, amazing S tier, but there are other units to talk about in this game. First and foremost is Noish. I think that Noish is an average unit. Unfortunately for those who would say that mounted is king in this game, and I agree, mounted and swords are king. If you have one or the other, you're doing pretty good. And if you have both, you're astonishing basically to start. But the problem is that Noish has very bad bases, very bad growths. He has an okay promotion. He has no relatively good skills to speak of. Of course, his skills are very interesting. Accost and critical are good, but they're not as good as Sigurd's Pursuit, which is literally just double attack. I came up with a bit of, I want to say, a solution to Pursuit. And that is that every character in the game should just automatically be able to double attack if said character has 5 or more attack speed than the opponent. In fact, I would probably bump that up. I would say like maybe even 8 or more. And that seems like a lot, but characters like Noish never can double anyway, so giving him this little bit of a buff. Every other character in this game who doesn't have Pursuit or cannot get Pursuit in any way, shape, or form besides the Pursuit ring, if these units could Pursuit, if you had 5 or more or 8 or more attack speed than the opponent, they would be fantastic. What Pursuit would do, the skill, because I don't think the skill needs to be removed, it should be that if you just have 1 attack speed or more, you double. This would fix Pursuit entirely. It would make the skill still very useful, still very good. Not as good as it is now, but it would be still very good, especially if the requirements for the regular double attack is as steep as like 8 attack speed. Then that would mean that somebody like Noish would actually double in the first chapter, because the axe users are so slow that when he's using his steel sword, he would just double still. Most of your early game units, especially in the axe chapters of Prologue and Chapter 1, would basically have no problem dealing with any of them because they would all double. That would be fine. In fact, that'd be perfectly fine. That would make sense. However, Noish doesn't have this. This is not his option. He does not have Holy Blood. I don't even really think he's a good father for any child, because though Accost and Critical are cool skills, they are very cool skills. I'm not gonna downplay this. There are units that have better skills, including units that have Pursuit that can pass on Pursuit, or units that have Adept. I think Adept is better than Accost any day of the week. Name it, and I'll think it's better. Just period, bar none, blank. It's done. Noish is a good character for what he is. He's useful for what he can do, which is early game chip damage, and that's pretty much it. Unfortunately, that's pretty much it. Even a trained Noish without Pursuit Band is never going to be as good as somebody like Sigurd, ever. Sigurd could be untrained, left at level 4, and Noish could be fully trained, and he's never going to be as good as Sigurd. Just never. And it's just because of the realms of power and difference between somebody who has Pursuit and somebody who doesn't have Pursuit. That's unfortunate. He's still good, or I should say average, but he's not quite up there, in my humble opinion. Now, when it comes to Alec is a little bit better, in my humble opinion. I think, actually, Alec is a good unit. Not average, not great, not amazing. He is a good unit. And the reason why is because he has Pursuit. He also has Nihil. So, having Nihil is actually fantastic, especially for the early game. It is almost essential, in my humble opinion, for a certain recruit, and that recruit is Ira. And the reason being is because, well, it's pretty phenomenal. It's actually pretty phenomenal for him to have. Yeah, the ability to just deny her any of her sword skills, which would be Astra, which basically would allow Ira to even KO Sigurd or Quan in the early game in some instances, especially if they've taken any kind of chip, is just kind of amazing, because even if Alec is doubled, he will never be KO'd, even at base, by Ira. So that's pretty fantastic. I personally find that to be very useful in his own set of utility. Now, the reason why I'm putting him in good isn't because he can help recruit Ira. No, it's just because he can pursue. He's a mounted sword-wielding pursuit user, right? Who is not only capable of doing all that, but he has relatively decent growths. And of course, he does have the male paladin promotion, which for Noish doesn't fix really any of Noish's problems, but it does help Alec a lot because Alec kind of lacks in the power department in the early game, especially, whereas Noish doesn't really have that lack. Noish just lacks the ability to double. And then the first 4 units that you receive in Prologue are finished off with Arden, who is unfortunately going to go in D tier. Poor unit. Arden is kind of cursed in this game, just like Hannibal as well. Now, I actually feel like a few other characters are in this realm that could easily be put in D tier if it wasn't for the fact that those units have much better promotions. So, when it comes to Arden, Arden is an armor sword. He is the best type of armor sword or armor knight that he could be in the game. If he was an armor lance or an armor axe or even an armor bow, I feel like he would be candidate for Z tier, maybe Z plus or something like that. And the reason being is because he would just be terrible, especially with his base stats. His base stats leave so much to be desired. It's incredible. His growth rates aren't that great. The fact that he only has 5 movement, that means he gains a whopping 1 additional point of movement on roads. 6 movement. That's pathetic. Even just get off the road for a second, he can't keep up with anybody. He is good at guarding your castle. He is good at hitting side objectives if you are okay with him getting there a little bit late. And he's very good at getting the pursuit band because he's the only character who can get it. And when he does get it, I will say, he is basically a C tier unit if he keeps the pursuit band, as well as has like the brave sword, so on and so forth. He's fantastic in the arena then, he's fantastic in combat, blah blah blah. I don't think any of these things can salvage him. His promotion turns him into a general, and this game, generals, just like in Thracia, have access to swords, lances, axes, and bows, and that doesn't fix anything for him. He doesn't care about axes, he doesn't care about lances. He kind of appreciates bows. Bows are a very good ranged option in this game. In fact, they're better than sword range options, and they're definitely better than lance and axes range options. So having bows would be okay if it wasn't for the fact that he is not mounted. Technically, you could give him the leg ring and the knight ring, and then he would have all the cavalry buffs as well as the pursuit band. He would be an unstoppable juggernaut. That is way too much babying for a particular unit that has absolutely no, and I mean no, utility. So the unfortunate part about Arden is that regardless of the fact that he is fun, and at times he is fun, I will definitely admit that. Many a time, I'll get the speed ring with him. I'll get the pursuit band with him. I'll keep those on him. I'll put the brave sword on him. I'll give him a silver sword. I'll give him some kind of magic weapon, the magic band. I will tear things a new one with General Arden. He's still a D tier. There's nothing that can be said otherwise, unfortunately. He's just not in a good spot. Not having movement, not being mounted in Genealogy is pretty terrible. You can fix unmounted combat. You cannot fix unmounted movement. Not without some very expensive options going towards a singular unit, because the problem is that you only have one leg ring in the game. And the Night Ring doesn't really fix movement. It just pairs well with the leg ring. I would never give somebody the leg ring without also giving them the Night Ring unless that unit already has Canto. That's pretty much fact of the matter there. Now moving forward, I have Azel. Azel is a tough unit to rate because I actually think that Azel belongs in D tier before he's promoted. Maybe C tier. I don't think him having tomes or magic is good enough to put him into C tier alone, given the fact that he only has 5 movement. I will say he's better than Arden. He is definitely better than Arden, but I still think before he's promoted, he's a D tier unit. After he's promoted, I would say he's an A tier unit. Now, when it comes to my own personal usage, and this might be a little bit of a bias here because the Mage Knights, you only get 1 of in either generation, and the Master Knights, which you only also get 1 of in each generation, are my favorite units, just period, bar none. Azel is incredible when he is promoted. I would probably say he's definitely more deserving of a C tier before he's promoted because magic still does something for him. He still has some power. It's not great, honestly, especially when you get to the point where he's either not doubling or he can't even 2-shot. There's times where like I'll have the magic ring on him, the skill ring, the speed ring, and typically I give him all 3 until he's promoted. And he can't do anything. He just legitimately can't do anything. He can't take on armies of enemies because he is about as frail as a piece of tissue paper, and that's unfortunate. However, it has to be said that if you just look at the starting situation of your particular units and you take nothing else into account, you're kind of not looking at the whole picture. Because it's really not that hard to promote Azel. Typically, I have him promoted before Chapter 3 is done. And then you have him for the rest of the generation, Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, where vastly it's far and away more important for him to be promoted and for you to have another combatively viable, huge damage-dealing unit, because nobody has resistance in Gen 1. It cannot be understated that Azel, once promoted, is almost an entirely new, unique, and different unit. Alright, so with the first 5 units out of the way, each in his own individual tier, it is time to move on to Lex. So Lex is a unit who I love using. I'm going to put him in good, in B tier. I don't think he's great, right? The reason why is because he is an Axe Knight. He does promote to Great Knight. He doesn't get Pursuit in any way, shape, or form without the band. He has Vantage, which is sometimes very occasionally useful, not typically, because most of the times he's never at low HP or low enough HP for that to matter. And Paragon is insane. He is always the unit that I have promoted first in Genealogy Gen 1. He is always the unit I have promoted first. As long as I'm using him, right? With the Brave Axe, which is his own weapon, nobody else can use it in Gen 1, at least until you get your Master Knight or Arden's promotion. Otherwise, the Brave Axe is just his. The Brave Axe works fantastically with Vantage when you want to pull that little stunt off. It's actually not hard to do either, because you can just send him through a tough arena fight, and then for the rest of the chapter he's at half HP. So as long as you're only dealing with 1 range units, he can always go first and always attack twice, even on enemy phase. This is pretty great, but the problem is that a lot of units, especially after Chapter 1 in Gen 1, don't have just 1 range and don't have just lances or axes. And when he's at weapon triangle disadvantage, there's a likelihood that he is just going to miss. Because axes are terrible when it comes to weight, terrible when it comes to hit. And most of that terribleness when it comes to hit is because of weapon triangle. Then you have the hand axe, which only has 50 hit. Has 10 might, but 50 hit. It's grossly pathetic as a ranged option. I always give it to him, because why have nothing? You know, have something, but you'll almost never see me use it. Lex is a fun character, and he's really strong once he's promoted and once the Brave Axe has crit. Sometimes I kind of don't want the Brave Axe to get crit, because once it does, you're giving yourself the potential of an enemy in Gen 2 having crit on you with a Brave weapon. Because the Brave Axe doesn't get inherited to anybody in Gen 2. There's nobody who inherits axes. It goes to an enemy boss in the first chapter of Gen 2. So you have to be kind of careful about that. You have to weigh your options. For the most part, I don't really care. I'll typically get it around like 40 to 50 kills, and then I'll leave it at that. I won't get to exactly 50. But then there's times where I'm like, to the wind, to the wind. Lex is a great unit. He's a good unit. B tier. The problem is that he's never going to be as good as Azel when promoted, or as good as Sigurd, or as good as other B and A, or as good as other A and S tier units. Speaking of an A tier unit, I have Quan. So Quan, unfortunately, is one of the lesser available units you have in your game. And the reason why I say this is because he leaves the chapter that you recruit the last few units. So technically he has a little bit more availability because he comes in prologue. He's here for chapter 1, he's here for chapter 2, he's here for chapter 3. So he has a bit more availability than a few units towards the end of Gen 1, but he has a poor availability otherwise. You only get him until chapter 3. But while you have him, he is a perfectly good Jagan. Now, he is not of a Jagan archetype. This is actually something that I fervently enjoy. There's 3 types of Jagans, right? There's the original Jagan, which is poor growth, pre-promoted, early game enemy softener, if you will. Whereas then there is Oifis. Oifis have decent growth. They can keep up with most of the rest of your cast for the game. And then you have Seths, which are overwhelmingly good. Just fantastic units. They're better than most of your cast at the start of the game. They're better than most of the cast at the end of the game. There are only 2 Seths, and that would be Seth and Titania. The Oifis, however, the Oifis would definitely stem to Oifi, of course. Quan is one. Quan has pretty decent growth rates. He will keep up with the rest of your crew. He would even keep up with your crew in Gen 2. So there's that. And then there's like, for instance, Marcus in FE7 and Soth in FE10. Those are the Oifis of the series. Quan fulfills his role quite well until he attacks with Adept. When he adepts and he gets a KO that you didn't want him to get, it's kind of a little bit frustrating at times. But granted, if you want Quan to be leveled to 30, if you want to get him to max level so that he can help both his children get as many stat bonuses as possible, it's probably for the best that when he gets Adept, you just don't complain about it. He's a great unit. Lances, though they all have weapon triangle disadvantage against the first 2 chapters worth of enemies, he doesn't care. He has so much defense, he has so much offense, and then when Adept procs, he just has that wonderful opportunity to just delete units. And then for a short period of time in chapter 3, he gets the J-Bolg, and when he has his holy weapon, he's unstoppable. There's nobody who could defeat him in all of the first generation that he is playable in. There's just nobody who could defeat him. I actually typically like keeping his arena fights until later when I get the J-Bolg, and then sending him through the arena with the J-Bolg just for fun. Sometimes I forget, sometimes I neglect that, because it's really just a for fun thing. Quan is an A-tier great unit. He is very helpful, very necessary for many strategies. I would say that his wife, Ethlyn, is also an A-tier unit. Now, the reason why Ethlyn is an A-tier unit is entirely different than Quan's reasonings. This is another reason why I have kind of made the tiers a little bit differently than how I did with Thracia. It would still work because my A tier on my Thracia tier list was perfect combat or utility. She doesn't really have combat to speak of. She just has great utility. She's a mounted healer. Now, of course, you can actually give her good combat. You can give her the Pursuit Band, which I typically do, but I typically wait till Chapter 3 to do that because I love having Leaf inherit the Pursuit Band. And then you could give her things like the Silver Sword or the Brave Sword or whatever, what have you. And you can really do good work with Ethlyn when it comes to combat, but you have to invest a lot to get to that point. A lot. After promotion, she's pretty decent with combat even when she doesn't have any of these things. And the reason being is just because female paladin promotional gains are pretty good. Pretty darn good. This game is not afraid of promotional gains being good. Thracia and Genealogy, the Jugdral games just have such good promotional gains that you don't even have to care whether your units grow at all. They're gonna blow up after promotion. Ethlyn is essential in the early game because she is your only healer you have in prologue. She's your only viable healer that you really have in the first chapter for the most of the first chapter. And she's really the only good healer until you have a promoted Rakusis. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that Ideen is chopped liver, or even Deidre. Deidre can heal. But with their options, their best options being Physic, something you gain at the end of Chapter 2, I don't really think that they compare to Ethlyn's utility, especially because she is more available than either of them for the early game, that is, let alone the fact that she's mounted. I think she's actually a really good user of the Light Brand and the other magical swords, especially upon promotion. You could even give her some funny stuff like a magic ring and really just watch her do some good work with the weapon because nobody has good resistance in all of Gen 1. Pretty much only a couple of bosses do. Alright, next is the final of the Leonster Knights, and that would be Finn. Finn is what I would call a great unit. So the reason why I give Finn this tiering is because he gets the Brave Lance, right? But not only that, he is the most available character in all of Genealogy. Not only is he the most available character, but he's also pretty fantastic, both Gen 1 and Gen 2. Now, Gen 2, he does fall off a little bit more than you would necessarily like him to, but he's still good. He still is a serviceable unit, and he's nigh necessary for certain strategies, especially in the early game for me. And in his re-recruitment chapters in Gen 2. I think that some things aren't so great about Finn, though, and it's just because he's a Lance Knight. Lance Knights kind of suffer from the fact that they have very, very poorly weighted weapons and no good 1-2 range option. The Javelin is incredibly bad. It's better than the hand axe, but it's incredibly bad. And I would rather have a magic sword with 0 magic than pretty much any javelin or hand axe shenanigans in this game most of the time. In the early game, you can get by with the javelin with somebody like Sigurd or Quan because they just have so much damage. They have so much hit. But for the most part, he's just kind of lacking something. He's always lacking something. I will say, however, though, he has Miracle. Miracle is the particular reason why I'm putting him in great and not good. Now, Quan has a better start than Finn by a mile. He also has, in my humble opinion, a better skill than him, which would be Adept. But Miracle is incredibly powerful when it activates. It means if you have Finn get to 1 HP in a round of combat, for the rest of that turn, he is invincible. Because the way that Miracle works in this game is it's 11 HP minus your current HP and then that number times 10, and that's how much avoid you get in the battle screen. Not the stat screen, the battle screen. So that means that if you're taken down to 1 HP, you get 100 avoid in the battle screen. Even if your opponent has 100 hit, he can never hit you, because it will just be a straight minus 100. This is amazing. This is incredible. This right here is why I have put him in great tier rather than good, because I do think that Quan is quite a bit better than Finn at his start, let alone the fact that obviously Finn has better availability, but I don't think the availability is enough to boost him to a higher tier. I think more or less it's Miracle in combination with everything else. His availability, the fact that he's a good unit, and he's got pretty decent growth rates. Now, moving on to the very next unit, we have Midir. Midir! So Midir is, in my humble opinion, a good unit. I actually think he is the only good bow unit you have in all of Gen 1, even though you get 3 of them. Technically, you can have 5 if you have certain promotions, so on and so forth. But I think he's the only good bow unit. I really do, because he is the first viable mounted bow unit you have that can use the killer bow, as well as the brave bow, something he gets from a conversation with Ideen. He is also a very great father for Ideen's children, because he can pass down the bows to hers and his son, and then he can just take on that torch. And I really do think that Lester is the best bow unit in Genealogy, period. But that's only because of the stuff that you can give him. If you don't give him a good assortment of items, especially like a brave bow with near to crit, he's not really that great. Actually, he's just not really that great. And the reason why is because in Gen 2, bow units are not as good as they are in Gen 1, which is kind of wild. And the reason why that is because the maps are bigger, the enemies are tougher, magic is everywhere. So if you don't have like a crit brave bow, if you can't one round with a brave bow, you're gonna kind of struggle. Gen 2 is a little bit harsher on the bow units. So unfortunately, the bow units in the Gen 2 rating are probably going to go a little bit lower on the tier list than Gen 1 in some cases. I do think that he is probably the worst of the good mounted units, the B tier good units. He's not as bad as Noish, because again, Noish has a lot of issues. At the very least, Midir has Pursuit. He not only has Pursuit, he has a Cost, which is a very great skill for a bow user, especially once he's promoted, especially once he has decent HP, especially once he has the Brave Bow and the Killer Bow. He can become a pretty phenomenal user of all these things and a pretty phenomenal unit. But of course, he needs a lot of work. And that's the problem with Midir. He needs work. The issue is, he's your first bow unit. So whatever amount of work he needs is totally justifiable, because you have him from Prologue. Not from the beginning of Prologue, but you have him from Prologue. So it's not as though he is a damned unit in that case. All right, so the very next unit I have to talk about is the very first recruitment of Chapter 1, and that would be Du. Du is an S tier unit in my humble opinion, and it kind of has nothing to do with his combat even post-promotion, because the problem is that Du has pretty bad, pretty lackluster combat even after promotion. He does have some decent growth rates and decent stats once he does promote and once he does grow a bit, and he can use any sword in the game besides holy weapons after promotion. But before promotion, he's stuck at a C rank swords. He can't use anything like the Brave Sword. He can't use anything relatively good besides the Magic Swords, which, by the way, he's not really adept at using, other than using it to steal gold from a distance. But the problem is that you got to throw that away. He is one of the best units in the game for the fact that he can share his gold with the entire army. Let alone the fact that there's several instances in this game where he can get tens of thousands of gold in a single enemy phase, or in a couple of enemy phases. I think of Chapter 3, and when you're fighting the Orga Hill Pirates as an example. Most of them have a sub 20% chance to hit him. And if you have Sigurd in range, it's like a sub 10% chance to hit. And at that point, he can be surrounded and get 5,000 gold from each enemy he smacks. And you can just throw that gold at any one of your units, and it's incredible. This is powerful. I would dare say that if you're not doing a ranked run, or if you don't care about getting people like certain items or inheritance or this, that, or the other, you don't care about that kind of management, that micromanagement, I would say that Do is probably like a B tier unit, maybe even like a C tier unit. And the reason being is because without that utility, he's virtually useless. You can use him, you can raise him up, but the problem is that otherwise he's not going to ever be competent. And he's never going to be a unit that you're just going to say, well, I think I'm going to send Do into combat today. Maybe after he's level 30. Maybe if he has like an Earth Sword, a Brave Sword, a Wind Sword, so on and so forth, maybe then. Otherwise, I'm just not so convinced. But he is an S tier unit for my purposes, because this is my list, and these are obviously going to be partly my biases. Moving forward is Ideen. Ideen is going to go in B tier. This is going to be kind of like a stark contrast to Thracia. This is another reason why I wanted to make the tier list a little bit differently for this game, because the games are just so different. She has perfect staff utility, basically. The only staffs that she can't use, I believe, are Rescue and Fortify, if I'm not mistaken. I think those are the only A-tier staves. I think there might be another, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Berserk is an A-tier staff. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, because I just don't recall. But the problem is that Warp is not really that good in this game in comparison to Thracia. It is good. Do not take me out of context. I'm not saying it's not good. It's just that you can only warp to a castle. You can't warp to whatever space you please. And that means that you have to own the castle in order to warp your teammate to that castle. It's not as necessary as you would think. There are some uses for it, especially I can think of like Chapter 4, getting all of your units back to Selene so that they can move on to Zaxxon from the attack on Thove is something that only your Warper and Return Staff user can really help you do. However, for the most part, you have enough turns, especially with your mounted units, to get back there anyway, pretty much regardless. Without Warp, without Return, they're still good staffs. Physic is still a good staff. Mend, Recover, still good staff. Sleep, Silence. You're pretty much not going to be able to use Sleep or Silence on her. And the reason why that is because she can't get Sleep. There's just no way that you're going to get her promoted in time for her to get a Sleep staff. Without a lot of... Well, you probably could with a lot of abusing, like Warp abuse. You probably could. But aside from that, because I'm not a grinder, I don't care about that. I find it kind of heinous to grind in Fire Emblem. It's a waste of my time, especially when you can beat any Fire Emblem game in the series, at least of the ones that I'll play, with pre-promotes, with basic weapons, and no growths even. So the fact of the matter is like grinding is just not, it's just not for me. So there's relatively no realistic way you're going to get her the Sleep Staff. And the Silent Staff is not going to happen either. Both of them are so ridiculously expensive to repair. 30,000 gold to get each one, both of them, to max uses. And I believe the Sleep Staff only has one use, so you're paying 30,000 for one use. The Silent Staff has 3 uses, so you're paying 10,000 per use. Neither are really that useful in Gen 1. There are a couple instances, like for instance, silencing the boss of Chapter 1, or silencing the sleep boss in Chapter 2. I think those are pretty much your only instances of where that's useful. There's a couple of other times where silence or sleep can be viable, and I would say use them when you got the chance, but otherwise it's not enough utility. It just really is not. She is not mounted. She has 5 movement. She's never going to be anywhere you need her to be. And even when you have physic, your units are going to outpace her. They're going to get out. They're going to be totally out of her way. And if you do what I do, which is that you give Sylvia the Night Ring and Leg Ring, you're going to want Sylvia to move along with your mounted units, which she can more than keep up with at that point. And at that point, she's not going to be hanging back to get somebody like Ideen up to the front lines or even close to the front lines to use physic. So it's just not, in my humble opinion, I think she's a good unit. I just don't think she's great or better. The very next unit to speak of is Ira. Ira is a Myrmidon, and though she has swords, which is the best weapon in the game, best weapon type I should say, she is kind of lacking in many other areas. So she has Pursuit, she has Astra, she has some pretty good skills, and she gets some pretty good skills upon promotion. She's very good at singular combat when she gets to a point where she's actually like one-rounding. At base, she's not one-rounding. Even with the Silver Sword, she's not one-rounding. Sigurd doesn't one-round in the chapter that she joins in. And he starts out with like 3 or 4 base points of strength higher than her when he begins in prologue. If he's not one-rounding with the Silver Sword, she's not. So the fact of the matter is that good old Ira is, in my humble opinion, she's basically a unit that's good for arena. She's good for like solo combat. She's good for like side objectives. And that's pretty much it, unfortunately. Of course, you do get the wonderful, absolutely amazing Brave Sword out of a conversation with her and Lex, or her and Holin, I think. I never do that pairing, though, ever. Because Lex is just a better unit than somebody like Holin. Period. Bar none. Having too many sword units and then not being able to use like all the brave weapons is just kind of egregious to me. So I do like using all the brave weapons, and in that case, somebody like Lex is just far more important to me than somebody like Holin, or Ira for that matter. Ira is a C tier, average unit. I would say that Noish is better than her. Not combatively, but the fact that he is mounted, he has a better promotion in promotional gains, I should say, because she technically has a better promotion for combat because she turns into a swords master. But I would say that he's better off, not by much. We're talking like minutia here. Minutia. He's better than her, but not by much. Ira is a good mother, especially if you have good father pairings with her. Like Lex is probably, in my humble opinion, the best, because it gives both of her sword children a buff to the fact that neither one of them are capable of using ranged weapons to any kind of level of degree. Neither one of them have mounted movement. Neither one of them are really good at fighting hordes of enemies or so on and so forth. So the fact of the matter is that they kind of need the help. They kind of need the paragon advantage that Lex gives them. Plus, he gives them a lot of defense. They get pretty good offense from it. The fact of the matter is that the only thing that makes this kind of an issue is that when Lex pairs with anybody, he doesn't pass down any weapons. He only passes down items. Like, for instance, the skill ring, I typically give that to him. I typically KO the Silver Blade wielding Chagall with Lex so that Lex can pass down the Silver Blade to his son. And I feel like that's very useful in that little retrospect. But otherwise, when you really look at it, Ira and Lex, though they're a great pairing, they make some pretty darn good kids, She's really good at single combat. She's not really that great concerning, like, pure genealogy gameplay. If you're trying to be any kind of efficient, you're trying to be any kind of fast, if you're rushing the main objectives, you're rushing the main castles, she's never going to be there. She's really good for the side objectives. There's plenty of times where you're going to need her and other units to defend the castle, or go to other villages, or help out with like this fight or that fight because there's just too many enemies. In that case, I do think that Ira's very good. It's just that she falls short from so many things that utility-wise, she's just not good. If Ideen had a C rank in staves, I would probably put Ideen in a C tier, maybe even a D tier. If I would do that to somebody who has staff utility, even if it's just C rank, even if all she could use is like mend and return, I would put her in C or D tier. Ira doesn't even have utility like that. Like, how am I supposed to rate this unit? She is good for what she can do, but she's just an average unit all around. She's not good compared to other units. Now, when it comes to Deidre is a little bit of a kind of a weird scenario. Deidre is not very available. I actually would put Deidre in C tier. The only good utility she has staff-wise is a couple of silences here and there. And she only has 3 silences. There's no reason why you would ever want to repair the silence, in my humble opinion, in the first generation. In my humble opinion. There's just no reason. There's a couple of instances where I can think of like a cheesy way that you can use silence to basically win over a boss, like Reptor I'm thinking of. Reptor would be a hilarious boss to cheese with something like silence, but there is a problem with that. You have to have a unit who has a very high amount of magic, and even then it's a percentage chance, because you're going to take your magic and then minus the resistance of Reptor, and then I believe that it's taken in that kind of percentage, and I believe that's only like a 10 or like a 30% chance you'll be able to hit him. It's not very good. But if you did hit him, it would make him a non-threat. And he is the hardest boss in Gen 1. So I guess you could say that that's pretty good utility with the Silent Staff, but Deidre is not capable of doing that. Deidre is only available in the end of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. And she's only available in the castle, the main castle of Chapter 3. Until you have seized, I think, Medino? Or is it Silval or Medino? It's one of those. It might be Medino. But either way, the point that I'm trying to make is that Deidre's not really all that great. She's got some pretty darn good magical damage, but she's never going to double really with that magical damage. You can get her through pretty much any arena that she's capable of fighting, which would be Chapter 1, 2, and 3, using Miracle. She's very strong if you train her, but the problem is you only have 1 chapter to use her trained against enemies, which would be Chapter 2. So you really have to look at her and be like, well, is the power, is the Silent Staff, is Aura, are these things good enough to justify her being anything above average? I think she's better than Ira. I think she's better than Noish, and you have both of them for the entire generation. I will say that. I think she's better than them, because she does have some utility, but I don't think it's enough to put her in a place like B tier. Then there is Jamka. Jamka is, unfortunately, a very good combative unit against one enemy or against the arena, who I think is in a very poor spot. I actually think he's a D tier unit. Jamka is almost as bad as I actually think he's I'll say this. I think he's a little bit better than Arden, because he can do some pretty astonishing damage to a single unit throughout the entirety of the game, especially if you have the killer bow on him or the brave bow. He can become good with some babying. But the problem is he's still an archer. I actually think he's probably the worst archer in the game. I don't think any other archer comes close to how bad he is. Not in Gen 1, not in Gen 2. Because the other archers that I'm thinking of both have the UFEL, or in Midir's option or position, he's mounted. So the only thing he's got going for him is he's going to KO a single unit on player phase, and then you have to kind of hope that you're not playing on clever mode, or the enemies are so stupid, or the authority that they have over them is so stupid that the AI that they're given is that they will attack at 2 range a unit like Jamka, which can happen, by the way. This is not unreasonable. He is not a useless unit on enemy phase in Genealogy. It's just that there are so many more useful units. And if the enemies decide, due to their quirky AI at times, that regardless of this possibility, they're not going to attack him at 2 range, like javelin-wielding armor knights or whatever, they're going to attack somebody else at 1 range, or do this, that, or the other, be absolutely quirky, then your whole enemy phasing with Jamka just kind of stinks. I actually think that there's a couple of instances where Jamka is pretty good, though. And one of those is when he first joins. Dealing with all of the bow units at the castle where Sandema is a pretty good use for combat. It actually gives him a very good first impression. He looks pretty darn good. He's got Pursuit, he's got Adept, he's got a Cost, he even has Critical with his killer bow. He is seemingly an amazing unit. But then you just look at the combat that he has for the rest of the game, and you kind of just go, why are there 3 archers, base archers in Gen 1? Why? Why is there even 1? But Midir is fine. But like, why is there an archer? There's 2 archers, non-mounted archers, I should say, in Gen 1. Why is there 2? It's just mind-blowing, mind-numbing. And unfortunately, that kind of lends itself to my opinion, which is that he's a D-tier unit. Not great. And there's kind of nothing redeeming about him when it comes to combat or utility. There's just really not. Alright, and now it is time to put Eldigan the Lionheart Chapter 3's music in S tier. Probably my favorite of the Gen 1 music themes of the chapters. I absolutely love this music. Well, I love all of Genealogy's music. I really love Thracia's more in a way, but Genealogy does have some pretty good music. The reason why I love Genealogy's less is because they're on like a 2-minute loop, and you can be playing these chapters for hours. And that's not great, but it's Super Nintendo era gaming. So next unit on the list is Holin. Holin is going to go in straight D tier. Unfortunately, I think he's on the levels of good of Arden and Jamka. He is a sword user, a Myrmidon who turns into a hero, not even as good as Swords Master, if you want my honest opinion. He's got 2 interesting skills in Pursuit and Luna. Luna is okay. It's nowhere near as good as Astra, in my humble opinion. It's still good. It's still good. Don't mind me. It is still good. It's just not great. And he is not mounted. He's got poor movement before and after promotion. And yeah, he's just not what I would call a fantastic unit. It would probably be a little bit different if I could promote him into a hero of a different game where he would have swords and axes, and then be able to use something like the Brave Axe, while there are other units using like the Brave Sword and so on and so forth. That'd be pretty cool, especially if he could then inherit the Brave Axe to somebody, but, he can't do that. Lex can't do that. Nobody can do that. He can't even use the Brave Axe, so this is a pointless conversation. Holland, in my unfortunate opinion, is a D tier unit because the only thing he offers to the table is a little bit of singular combat versus one enemy, something that Ira and Jamka do. Ira does better because she's there for a longer period of time. She's there sooner. Holland is not a character you get until Chapter 3 of Genealogy Gen 1. And the issue is that his bases aren't good enough. He's not mounted again. He doesn't have really any seriously good utility, in my humble opinion. He's just another sword user, another sword using unit. And those swords are the best weapons in this game, best weapon type. That does not make up for his poor combat and the fact that he's not really good at enemy phase. The problem is that most of these units that aren't tanky enough, they don't have access to multiple different weapon types, they don't have really good weapons, or so on and so forth, they're not mounted, they just don't have good enemy phase, they don't have good player phase sometimes. And that's not to say that any of these units are terrible. I will say that. You have to be careful. I'm saying poor in my perspective of how I use the unit. That does not mean these units are bad. I actually don't think there's truly a poor or useless unit in any of the Fire Emblem games I've ever played. It's just that for my strategies, somebody like Holland or Jamka or Arden is poor. And I'm just going to have to leave it at that. Now when it comes to Rakessis, I think this girl, before promotion, deserves C tier. I actually think her and Azel are in very similar spots. I think she deserves C tier before promotion, just like Azel deserves C tier before promotion. I think Azel deserves like in between D and C tier, whereas Rakessis is just straight up C tier. The reason being is because Rakessis does have the Miracle Sword, so she can get through any arena that you want her to, so she has that little bit of utility. She can use magic swords. Not very well because her magic growth's not that great. After promotion, she can use it a little bit better, but still not very well. She is not great combatively, but she does have C rank and staves, which means that she can help with the whole staffing situation. More healing is always better. I don't think this is enough of a reason to put her in C tier. I think it's like a combination of all these things. Now, she is not a C tier unit. After promotion, she is an A tier unit. Rakessis is the only Master Knight that you get in Gen 1 after promotion. Master Knights have access to every weapon type in the game except for Dark, and technically in Gen 1 except for Light as well. Because Master Knights get an automatic A rank in Swords, Lances, Axes, Bows, Wind, Thunder, Fire, and a C rank in Light. There is no C rank Light Tome in all of Gen 1. In fact, there's only one C rank Light Tome, and that's found in Gen 2. She is not capable of getting that. Nobody is capable of getting it. Aura is the only Light Tome you get in Gen 1, and only Deidre can use it. So that's besides the point. Rakessis can do something that no other unit in Gen 1 can do, and that is that she can attack with a melee weapon, or I should say she can attack with the Brave Bow, and then equip like a melee weapon, or equip a different weapon. She can use every Brave weapon in the game. She can use the Brave Axe, Brave Sword, Brave Lance, Brave Bow. She can use any tome in the game that is not light, so she can even use like the Thoron tome that you get from Teal 2. She is very adept at pretty much everything you would want her to do. And the fact that she also gets an A rank in staves means that she is a mounted warp user. That's pretty darn good. That's actually very useful. She's the only unit in your entire party that gets mounted warp. And that in itself is pretty just astonishing. She can use physics, she can use fortify, she can use recover. She's not going to have enough HP to really justify using something other than like mend or recover. You could use things like Physic and Fortify, but it's not going to heal that much. In Gen 1, it's a little bit more okay than it is in Gen 2, because the fact of the matter is that she is capable of healing up most of your units to a decent amount, because most of your units don't have a lot of HP. They won't take a lot of damage, because this is Gen 1 we're talking about. So I think she's very good and adept with all of those tools. It's just unfortunate that she doesn't really get anything like the Rescue Staff. I don't think you get the Rescue Staff whatsoever. Yeah, you don't get the Rescue Staff in Gen 1. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure you don't get it. She is really good at using Restore, though. This is not... Well, actually, no. There is no instance where Restore is useful in Gen 1 except for Chapter 4? Technically Chapter 2, but you don't get the Restore staff until Chapter 3. So, yeah, so Chapter 4 is the only time, and I think it is not really relevant for her to have it at that point. She can use it. It's still something that she can do in her own utility. Master Knights are insane. Their promotion is insane. +7 strength, skill, speed, and defense is insane. She is incredibly good. That's one of the best promotions in all of the entire series. In fact, I think it is the best promotion, because we have to take into account not just the promotional gains, but the fact that she goes from an unmounted sword and staff wielder to a mounted every weapon in the game wielder, besides light and dark, and with those kinds of promotional gains. So even though there are technically better promotional gains elsewhere in this game and elsewhere in the series, particularly in Thracia, I do think that she's got the best promotion, she's got the best class, she's got the best utility. The problem is that her combat's not great and her start's not great. So with that in mind, her combat's great after promotion, obviously. It's just like Azel. With that in mind, I have to give her A tier. I can't give her S tier. Very next unit to rate is Beowulf. A C tier unit, average. I think he's better than Ira. I think he's better than Noish. I think he's better than Deidre. I think he's the best unit in C tier. Would I call him a B tier unit? No. The reason why that is because he's literally mounted Wholesome. That's literally it. He has nothing really relevant or good to speak of. He comes with Pursuit, which is good. He will get Adept upon promotion because all Rangers get Adept, which is good. Swords are good weapons. He's a very fantastic user of the Brave Sword or the Silver Sword, especially once it gets crit. I think he's a good unit. I just think that his recruitment comes a little bit late for my liking. For what he offers to the table. He doesn't really offer much. But, still a good unit. In fact, actually, you know what? I'm going to put him in B tier. I actually think he is worthy of a B tier. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think he's better than Noish. I think he's much better than Ira. He's much better than Deidre. I don't think he belongs in C tier. He's not an average unit, especially after promotion. I was just thinking about it, and his promotion really does make him into a monster if you're using him. Problem is I don't always use him. In fact, most of the times I don't use him. I actively avoid him. Now, Lewin is the next unit I'm going to rate, and I actually think that Lewin is a B tier unit. I think he's the best sage in this game. And the reason why is because he gets access to Forseti, and not only does he have access to Forseti, he also has Adept and Critical. He's got some pretty decent skills. He's got pretty decent stats. Once he promotes, he's going to have pretty much the best bases in the game for a magic user. Upon promotion, obviously. And I think he's a very good unit, very fun unit, and I think he's very viable in the first generation to lug around and use compared to other unmounted units. In fact, if you can see this, he's the only combat unmounted unit that is in B tier. And the reason why that is because mounted combat is just so much better than unmounted combat. It doesn't matter what weapon you're bringing to the table. But I cannot understate the fact that I love his pairing with Tiltu so very much because it gives you a Gen 2 first chapter start with the Forseti. And it fixes a unit that needs a lot of help, if I'm being honest, because this said unit is basically in Azel's position. He is a unit that comes even though he starts basically at the beginning of the very first chapter of Gen 2, he comes at a very low level. He is a mage that turns into a mage knight, so he only has 5 movement. The chapters are much bigger in Gen 2. The enemies are much stronger in Gen 2. So their pairing fixes all of those problems because then he gets Forseti upon arrival. That's insanity. That's incredible. And then a lot of people will say, like, well, isn't Ced canonically the character who's supposed to have Forseti? Who cares about canonical? Who really cares? Go play Thracia and enjoy Ced when you have him in Thracia. Nobody else can use Forseti in Thracia. There's a few options. There's a few options in Genealogy. So with that in mind, I think it's fun to just have fun with it. And I do think that pairing is a part of a unit's utility when it makes a big deal or difference for the unit in question. Arthur, Lewin's son with Tiltu, is arguably the best unit in all of Genealogy upon promotion. A mounted Forseti user is insane. A mounted Forseti user who has access to like the Thief Band, something that I always give him, is insane. If you wanted to give him the Bargain Band, that would be insane. And the reason why is because Lewin's actually capable of getting the Bargain Band very easily in Chapter 2. And not only is he very easily able to get it, he's actually a good candidate for it because he's one of the only holy weapon users that you have in all of Gen 1. He's the only holy weapon user that you're going to really have access to that's going to be any good with like 1-2 range combat. And having the Bargain Band means that he will be able to repair it a bunch and use it a bunch and get a bunch of crits with it or kills with it so that he can get crit with it so that his son can take over Forseti and just be an utter monster. When Arthur has the Forseti with crit, the fact that he's mounted with Forseti and crit is just, it's game over. It's literally game over. There is nobody and nothing that poses a threat to Arthur besides maybe like end game bosses. And that's one of the reasons why I think Lewin, well, one of the many reasons why I think Lewin deserves to be in a good tier. Now Sylvia, the next unit I'm going to rate, is S tier. Sylvia is an immediate and automatic S tier, even if I didn't give her the leg ring and the night ring every time I play with her. However, every time I use her, I always give her the night ring and the leg ring, so she has +3 movement, which means 9 movement in total, and she has the capacity to Canto. So the fact of the matter is, and it's the Ultra Canto that Genealogy has, she doesn't get like a dumbed down version of Canto just because the night ring isn't a class ability, it's a ring. She gets the full effects of it, so she could go ahead and attack with a weapon or whatever. She could, why would you ever attack with her? You would dance with her and then like re-equip something or this, that, or the other, blah, 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 talk to somebody, move out of the way, so on and so forth. Doesn't matter. Reposition her in a better position so that she can help with the next turn's dance, so on and so forth. Sylvia's amazing. Dancing for 4 units and having those 4 units move again, adjacent units, are that is probably the most credible and incredible and powerful utility in this game. I think that Sylvia's dancer utility is more powerful in this game than any holy weapon, than any brave weapon with crit, than any unit can possibly be. Because with it, she can make 4 of your most amazing units perform actions again. She can make some of your healers do more healing. She can have more of your combative units going out in the field and doing more attacks and so on and so forth. This is insane. So when I play Genealogy, I like to low man with my main crew that goes to the castles and seizes the objectives. And typically when I play, that crew consists of Sigurd, Azel, Rakesis, and like Midir and or Lex. Sometimes all of the above. That's my low man crew. Those are my crew. And having all of those be able to attack, or in Rakis's case, heal again, or anything of that nature, warp again, or whatever, that's insanity. That's so powerful. There's so many things wrong with people who do not understand the power, the absolute power of dancers in Fire Emblem. Even dancers that only dance for one unit are still incredibly good. And then you have Genealogy's dancers that dance for 4, and you have like Radiant Dawn and Path of Radiance. In certain circumstances, you can have dances for 4. That's insane. All right, so moving on to the Celestian Pegasus Knight of Aaron. Aaron is going to go in... This one's kind of a hard one. So Aaron is a terrible combative unit at first. You can give her things like the Brave Lance, and as long as you get her through enough of the arena, her with the Slim Lance is still pretty good combat to some degree. She's got pretty bad growths, though. Her promotion kind of helps her with some of that, as well as the fact that it gives her staves. I think that Aaron is personally a B tier, not a C tier unit. She's not exactly average. I would say she's good. She's another one of my mainstays in my army. I just don't necessarily mention her because I don't think she's as good as Lex, Azel, Rakesis, or Sigurd, obviously. And then you have like Midir. Midir, the Brave Bow, I think is better than anything that Aaron's bringing to the table, which is that, yeah, she can use the Brave Lance. I always give her the Brave Lance. I get crit with the Brave Lance on her. She passes the Brave Lance down to her daughter, which is a very good use of it. It's better than keeping it on Finn, especially if you have a promoted Finn. If you have a promoted Finn, there's no reason why you're not giving him a Silver Lance and maybe a Javelin and calling it a day. He will be perfectly fine with that. I don't even think he needs to be promoted. He would be fine with a Steel Lance, unpromoted, and a Javelin. He would be perfectly fine with that upon his re-arrival. Either way, Aaron's daughter needs the Brave Lance more than Finn. Aaron needs the Brave Lance for the couple of chapters that you have her after Finn leaves with Quan and Eflin. And she needs it more. Obviously, because her combat's not great. Her combat is not great. Even after promotion, it's not like the greatest thing in the world. But she does have the ability to use staves. She is another mounted staff user upon promotion. Her flyer utility is nil. Genealogy pretty much has no flyer utility whatsoever to speak of. There's a couple of instances where you can have a flyer move to certain positions that are really good, or help attack like a unit that's way out of the way. I'm thinking, for instance, like the Blizzard Mage that's in the middle of the mountains in Chapter 4 of Celeste, or the Meteor Mages that are in the desert on the little pillars. Most of your units can't possibly reach them, or at least reach them in time. Aaron can. Especially with the Brave Lance, she's taken them all out with ease, absolute ease. So I would say that there is some very minute flyer utility. Really, the reason why she's here and not C tier is because she gets staves upon promotion, so she's another mounted staff user, as well as the fact that she can use the Brave Lance. Her combat's passable at that point. The Slim Lance is pretty good. The Thief Sword's pretty good on her because she can reach villages that certain of your units can't reach in the same amount of time, because you're not going to have somebody like Sigurd go and try to reach a village rather than like reaching the main event, seizing a castle, KOing your enemies that are in the way, so on and so forth. I think she's perfectly fine in B tier. A good unit, not great. You have Tiltu next. Tiltu is very poor. I actually think she is the last unit in this particular game that I would rate in Gen 1 a D tier. So, spoilers, the last two units that are on this list are not going to be in D tier. Tiltu is. Besides her pairings, which I absolutely love certain of her pairings, especially with Lewin, besides her pairings, I actually don't think she's at all a contributive unit to this game, except for maybe a little bit of story, a little bit of that like inclination that she is relative to Reptor, and that she's part of Frege, yet she's not part of the evil of Frege, and so on and so forth. She's not like committing the atrocities that are in Thracia or the atrocities that are in Generation 2 of Genealogy. She's not following her uncle's schemes, so on and so forth. Tiltu is a good unit if you train her. The problem is that you get her at the very end, the absolute very end of Chapter 3 of Gen 1. That means she really only has 2 chapters left, and she's such a low level. Not only that, but she promotes to a bad class. War Mage is not good. It's just not good. No, there is no mage in this game that takes advantage of the swords after promotion, unless you're going to use magic swords, right? So whenever I promote Azel, I give him a magic sword, because his son, because of his pairing with Rekessis, is going to inherit only swords, not magic. And the problem is that magic swords work well with the statistical gains that he's going to give his child, especially with the growth rates, because Dermot, for instance, the son of Rekessis and Azel, in my particular pairings, will have about a 45% strength growth and a 40% magic growth, which means he's pretty balanced in both of those combative realms. If you give him the power ring and the magic ring, as well as a magic sword that's close to crit or has crit, he's pretty good. That's the only way that you're going to give somebody like Tiltu a sword and actually use anything out of that. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the Light Brand has weapon triangle advantage over all forms of magic in the game. And not only that, well, except for Dark and other Light, but you don't fight any other Light, and though you fight Dark, there's not much of that in Gen 1 at all. So, moving on, the Light Brand would be pretty good with her, but you're not getting her promoted before she would really benefit from that, because where she would really benefit from that is in Chapter 4, where you're fighting a lot of Wind Mages, and Wind Mages are kind of very terrifying because they have a very low weight, decent mighted weapon, and they're all in force. They dodge a lot. You can't really avoid them because Wind has a lot of hit, so on and so forth. It's kind of like one of those situations where too little too late for Tiltu. And that's the reason why she's a D tier. I don't really think that there's anything that she gains or she does that salvages her in that retrospect. The very next unit I want to talk to you about is Claude. Claude is an absolute average unit, C tier. He comes with no skills to speak of, and the only thing that he brings to the table that's relatively unique and useful, utility-wise, is the Valkyrie Staff. It's something that you're not going to use more than once unless you're farming for gold with somebody like Dew, because it's going to cost you 50,000 gold to repair the one use of it. But it is a very powerful staff. I'm not trying to underplay it. It is a staff that allows you to revive your teammate into the main castle, one teammate, upon its use. And of course, you can use it more than once as long as you repair it. And that means that you can bring back several units. You could bring back as many as you are capable of getting gold for. And though there's limited gold in this game, to a certain extent, you could probably feasibly bring back like 5 to 10 units from death. And that's pretty cool. But it's not great, because he's still such a low movement unit. He doesn't have combat to speak of. He can use magic. He's really good against magic units, especially in the Celestian chapter against the wind using units. If you were to give him the Thunder Tome, he's more than capable of being adept at fighting them, regardless of the fact that he doesn't have Pursuit or Adept or Miracle or Critical or any skills to speak of. He just has high magic and he has high resistance. So he's good with that, and he's good against the magic units that are in the arena for the most part. Except for maybe like some of the dark mages that you fight in the arena. And he's got decent staff utility, but it's nothing great because, again, he's not mounted. He's got some okay pairings They're really only to help like certain units. Like him with Sylvia is pretty good because it gives both of their children a lot, basically major holy blood, which is pretty good, and that's pretty useful. But in retrospect and reality, I don't think he's anything better than an average tier unit. And then finally, the last unit I have to rate in Genealogy Gen 1, Bridget. She is a sniper in this game, and I actually think she's the best sniper, particularly sniper, that you get in this game. And the reason why this is because she comes at a point where, you know, it's the end of chapter 3 in Gen 1. She gets the U-Fel. Once you talk to her with Ideen, she has an insanely powerful holy weapon in the U-Fel. She can have access to the brave weapons, the brave bow, the killer bow if you wanted. Most of the enemies in Gen 1 are pretty weak. She is capable of dealing with them very easily, two-shotting most. She's a very good user of the U-Fel against somebody like Reptor, or she can even deal with the Hellswath wielder. The fact of the matter is she's got a pretty good position for where she is for a sniper in the game. I actually think every other archer in this game is D tier. The Bow Knights are a little bit different. I think they deserve a little bit higher of a notoriety depending on how you pair and who you're talking about specifically. But I think for Bridget, I think she is very easily, and I mean very easily, a C tier unit. She is useful. She is far and away better than anybody who's in D tier, and I would actually say that she's better than most of the units in C tier for the most part. There is utility that some of them have that she just doesn't have, like for instance Fortify or Silence, or like the extreme magic damage of Aura in the beginning, the early game. The fact that some of these units have better pairings. Bridget's pretty good to pair with somebody like Dew because her daughter is literally the thief of the second generation, and she doesn't get bargained like Dew automatically. It's dependent on the pairing, and it's far and away better to give bargain in a pairing to Dew than it would be to give her like the bargain band, because the bargain band is just more useful on somebody else. Whereas, like, if she has innately bargain, she can go ahead and buy and sell things and do whatever she wants and still give gold to other units just like Dew can. So I think there's that. There's some good pairings to take into mind with that. And she's, all in all, you know, a good unit for what she is in Gen 1. All right, so with that in mind, this is my tier list complete of Generation 1 of Genealogy, Fire Emblem 4. Genealogy of the Holy War, particularly. This is a wonderful game, and I actually think Gen 1 is a very fun iteration of the game. So it's interesting, because most of the time that you see, and maybe this is the reason why not a lot of people enjoy Genealogy as much as I do, but most of the time that you see people complaining about certain units and unit types in all of Fire Emblem, people are complaining about pre-promotes or low growth units or so on and so forth. Gen 1 is basically that. Low growth units, they don't have very good growth. They have actually pretty poor growth for the most part. Not very good access to many things. You're missing out on a lot of very good weapons and items, let alone the fact that many of them are pre-promotes, so on and so forth. And I actually really like that. I find that kind of fun. There's a huge dichotomy of difference between playing Gen 1 and then also playing like Gen 2 with growth units of Holy Blood that you have paired, and then like substitute runs and so on and so forth. There's so many different iterations of pairings too that you can make, and then so many different ways to inherit weapons and items, that the game can become entirely different based on just how you play it in the first gen. The Gen 2 can become a different game entirely, which I just think that form of replayability is kind of unheard of, especially at a time like Super Nintendo in that era. I love Genealogy for all of this. I love these characters, and even the characters in literal Dead Last, D tier, poor units, Arden, Jamka, Holland, and Tiltu, they're still good units. They still can be used. Everybody on this list can have his usage. and become a good unit. But the problem is that some of these units need a whole lot more work than others, and some of them are just objectively not as good as others. And you have to take the objective into account, even if you're going to have a biased list like I do. There's probably a load of people who would never dare put Azel and Rakessus in A tier regardless of their promotions, just because of how hard it is to get to their promotion. But I really do think that their promotions, once you have reached it, is worth it, especially if you can get them in a reasonable amount of time. Usually, I try to have both of these units promoted before Chapter 4 starts, like before you leave the castle. And that's pretty much typically capable in both cases, especially if you're pairing them. You get the bargain band on either one of them, and then you sort of like hardcore focus the training of both of them. You give them as much experience points as you possibly can. You make sure that they clear arenas, so on and so forth. It's not as hard as people would like to point it out to be. But with all that being said, this has to be the end of my video. I want to thank you for joining me. If you like my content, please upvote and follow, or like and subscribe depending on the platform that you have chosen. Leave a comment down below, and while you're at it, have a great and glorious day gaming.